shapes, but we do not use men's or women's sections. So we have a pouch front or a flat front, and we are really re-envisioning the whole gender equal, values-driven shopping ecosystem. I was recently written up in the Forbes Next 1000 list, and really happy to be here with everyone today. So thanks for having me.
Fabulous. Thanks for coming. Great. Nancy, please introduce yourself. Wait, you're on mute.
It got flipped over, so I apologize that the image is reversed. My name is Nancy Ahola. I am co-founder and chief strategy officer for my company Z Instruments, which is now Henkabata Investments. It's a tech, hardware, software startup, specifically for the telecom industry. We just exited, and now I am going to be with an organization called CMG Consulting, especially working for companies that are doing their private equity, et cetera, investment area. I have been an investment scout for the last 7 to 10 years, and been doing a lot of work in how companies invest, especially in diversity sections as well. So anyway, happy to be here. More than happy to talk about advisory boards. So yeah.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us. And I just want to say, yesterday, we had a conversation with a venture capitalist who told us the data shows there's no consequential data that shows that diversity matters. So Nancy and anyone on this call who has any data to help support our cause, please put it in the chat. We need to get this data out there, because even when it is, we know it's ignored. So let's make changes. Adriana, please introduce yourself.
Sure, happy to be here. I'm Adriana Vasquez. I'm co-founder and CEO at Lilu. And at Lilu, we're focused on building smart garments and tech-enabled products to make the early stages of motherhood easier and stress-free. We're really focused on making the breast pumping experience easier. We launched our first product to market, which is the Lilu massage bra that helps moms pump more milk in less time. And yeah, I started the company 5 years ago based in New York City, and can attest to the power of having advisors help us build this company.
Amazing. Can't wait to hear from you. Thank you. Allison.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Allison Byers, the founder and CEO of Scroobius, and our mission is to increase diversity in the startup ecosystem by providing education, tools, and community that founders need to create investor-ready pitch materials so that they're taken seriously and meaningfully when they go pitch investors. And we're also building a platform to help early-stage investors easily find those founders. I've been in startups and tech my whole career before founding Scroobius, a month before COVID hit, which was fun, and made advisors extra important. I had launched and co-run a startup medical device company where I raised almost 10 million over the course of 5 years, and had my whole advisory board there and board of directors too. So I'm excited to talk about this topic today.
Amazing. Love what you're doing with Scroobius. Thank you. And last but not least, Marie. Tell us what you're up to.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marie Roker-Jones, co-founder of Esteem. And we help companies through our turnkey solutions to take their sustainability and diversity inclusion initiatives into measurable actions. And we like to say that we bridge the gap between good intentions and real social impact. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so I think the best place to start is maybe defining boards. Nancy, can you help us understand the difference between advisory and governing boards? Oh, you're back on mute.
Advisory boards are more about who are your trusted people that kind of help to guide you and figure out what your direction is. A lot of them may be people in the sector that have an experience that might be beneficial to your organization, whereas your actual board really determines the direction of your company. A lot of them have ownership in your company as well. And what can happen is they can sometimes, unfortunately, override your decisions, and they can affect the direction of your company against maybe your best wishes. So you have to remember that your advisory board tends to be, I think, a more supportive network, I think, especially as female founders, whereas boards are looking more at the company's direction, what kind of decisions are being made, especially in the financing area. And then also it looks more at what kind of direction the company does, perhaps market strategy, et cetera. So they are two somewhat different things, but they have very different roles.
Great. Okay, that's helpful. And would you pull from your advisors to put on your governing board?
I have mixed feelings about that, because if you have a person that's invested in your company and understands the mission, I see some people actually smiling about that. If they understand it and they understand your market segment, they can be really beneficial to being on your board. But for instance, if you have a person that has a complete financial background without any understanding of your market segment, they sometimes push you to make decisions that might not be good for your company. So like, for instance, bringing on investors just because there's capital involved versus what I call strategic investors, people that are really interested in watching your company grow, diversify, get the capital it needs, and then also make sure that that company is going to survive past whatever happens. It's not always the end goal for merger and acquisition or exit. It's really about your company gaining to market, hopefully becoming a market leader, and then basically having your company really thrive and grow.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. To most of us, the board can feel very ominous. So Allison, can you help us demystify that perception, please?
Yeah, and I think it is important to consider those two different boards, right? And one thing with the board of directors, for me, the key differentiation is they have voting power, right? So that's why you kind of report to them, right? They can really have say over the direction of your company, like Nancy was saying. Whereas my advisory boards, are more for you. They're really for the CEO and the management team, and they're your team. You don't report to them. They don't have voting power in the company. They might have equity or compensation, which I know we'll get into later, but it's very different than being able to, your board of directors can kick you out of the company, right? It's a very different power dynamic. So I think when we're talking about board of advisors for this call, they are like your best friends, especially in the very beginning of your company, right? And I know there is confusion over how formal it should be, and like, how often do you report to the advisory board? It sounds more formal when you say advisory board, but really, you as the founder and CEO have complete control over who you invite to be an advisor. And they are meant to help you and be your vocal champions, right, of you and your company, and fill in where you might have management gaps before you can hire your whole team. So they're like, I text my advisors, right? That's how informal it is. If I get good news, I text them. So there's a lot of things that you should consider when you are filling out. And I know we'll talk all about it in this hour, but it is important to know that it's not, advisory boards are not scary, and they don't have voting power in your company, and you fully decide who they are and what you give them. And it's a very helpful thing for you, not a scary thing.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. So you're building your team, the ones you're going to rely on. So Adriana, can you tell us a little bit on why you thought it was important to build out your board and what value they've brought you?
Absolutely. So as we started to form the team, we kind of started to look at what were the areas of expertise where we were lacking. And, pretty critically for us, there were certain initiatives that from very early on, we knew were going to be kind of like fundamental into, the business and market and go-to-market strategy. So Lilu, right, we have a medical and consumer device, and obviously both retail, physical product design, supply chain operations, and medical expertise, clinical expertise were very important. So looking at the founding team, my experience is in product design, engineering, software. My co-founder also an engineer. And pretty quickly we realized that we would need the clinical expertise. So even prior to Lilu being Lilu and having, incorporated, we were already doing research in the space. And I mean, I think those are great. Who are you talking to? Who is guiding you, right? And giving you the validation, right? That you need that in the early days, right? That you're solving an important problem, who's going to be your champion. And in our case, it was a researcher in the breastfeeding space. So Dr. Diane Spatz, it was our very first advisor. She is a director of a lactation program at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, evidently for a company that's launching in the lactation space, right? That was a big win. And having from pretty early on, her vote of confidence, having the ability, right, to, I can offer to, when I'm talking to potential partners, to potential people who ask me, what's the clinical evidence? I can mention, well, Dr. Diane Spatz, who's in our board of advisors, is leading the clinical trials for Lilu, right? So that goes such a long way and helps us establish credibility from day one. And because she's a person that carries a lot of weight in the market, she provides not only advice but also some sort of like defensibility against potential competitors and other things, right? So I think I really love quoting her as an example, right? Because just to show like, okay, I have no clinical expertise. I don't plan to get clinical or IV like lactation consultant expertise, but I have her, and that gives me the confidence, right? That and others, right? That what we're doing is meaningful from a scientific and medical point of view.
That's amazing. Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more into that, but yes, founders can't be everything, right? So we need to enlist the right people. So I would love to hear from you, Marie. Tell us about your board and how you found value from them.
Sure. So, I mean, I have to say that the fourth floor has been tremendous in helping me with building out my advisory board, but just want to share some of the pitfalls to avoid that I did, which was really having a lot of conversations and then not really having the clarity about what do I expect from a board? Like, what do I want from an advisory board? I think Adriana said it perfectly about like, who, if you don't have those skills or the experience, bringing on somebody that does have that. And I feel like in the beginning, I was more like Oprah, like you're an advisor, like really not thinking about it in those terms. And then really sitting down to see when I met one of our advisors, she really is asking us the key questions. And I said, wow, we have been doing this all wrong. And she's been so instrumental in just keeping us accountable and asking us the questions that help us to think strategically about our short-term and long-term goals. And I think that's key too, is that it's like having, if you think about your college advisor, like somebody, if you had a great one, it's someone who's there to help you along the way, answer questions and actually, fill in those gaps where you feel like I may not know, or maybe I'll, as Allison mentioned, text my advisor to say, hey, this opportunity came up. Do you have any ideas what I can do? And also inviting them to meetings, because I think that's key too. If there's, sometimes when you're speaking to someone at a higher level, bringing an advisor really does bring that credibility and what to talk about and to stay on track with the conversation. So, and your advisor may ask questions you didn't think of. So there's a lot of great reasons to have an advisory board and to use them in a way that is beneficial for both of you.
I love that so much. And thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that the fourth floor hasn't really talked about is bringing them to your meetings. That's really important. And yeah, we'll add that to our list of things to do with our advisors. So Abby, tell us a little bit about when you started to think about putting your board together. When is the right time?
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of different, not just set of knowledge, but a lot of different roles that people on an advisory board can be filling for you. And so I have some advisors that started out as mentors before I had a formal advisory board, right? And so they wanted to be involved in providing support, legitimacy, and advice in that way. And then I really started building out my advisory board early. I think that anyone in the startup ecosystem these days that is participating or attending, trying to educate themselves, attending sessions like this, or if you are part of an accelerator. So I went through an accelerator, and part of that really gave me a great network to source advisors from, people who got what I was trying to build and were interested in being involved, as well as being part of the fourth floor. So I think that it makes a lot of sense, as long as you're clear in your expectations and your understanding for yourself of what you're looking for in advisors and your advisory board. I don't think it's ever too early.
We agree. That's great. Thank you. Nancy, when did you go about putting your board together for your startup, and when do you advise startups to put their boards together?
Actually, we put together our advisory board from the beginning, and the reason why is because we had some overlap. Our advisory board members, some of them actually invested in our company in the first place, but it was both beneficial and also a drawback at the same time, because they became too intertwined in the day-to-day working. So it became, we did it from the very beginning, and they were really great in helping us to get leads for big contracts, to tell you the truth. They recommended for, hey, speak to this person or this person. And in the telecom space, a lot of it happens to be connections. It's a very male dominated area, a lot of engineering. As a woman in this area, though I can get in many doors, it was helpful to have some guys behind me. I hate to have that happen, but it does happen, unfortunately. And what happened was that we saw the need for someone to say, hey, you know what, your product is really great, but can you tweak it this way? Maybe you can talk to XYZ company. We had some major telecoms that became our customers through our advisory board. So that helped out tremendously as we got to traction. And because we were global from the beginning, we were born global, we worked in about 10, 15 different countries. It was great to have those advisory board members who could say, you know what, let me do X market. I'm going to work in the Singapore market. I'm going to work in the US market or the Japanese market. So it was really great to have that advisory board to not only give us connections, but to give us a sounding board.
And
Yeah.
I want to dive in here, because I always talk about how I appreciate the very specific and forward-looking mandate of the fourth floor about democratizing access to board seats, and exactly what Nancy was saying about just the system that we're in being so male dominated. And so depending on your industry, if you have an advisor who's male, being able to start a conversation, because the only way that we're going to be changing the system is by not just allies, but what I like to call champions, is people who actually put their time and effort into changing the system. And so, I know that later on we'll probably circle back to expectations and equity. Do we have men on our founding teams, et cetera? But I think that that's a really important point, that what we're doing here right now truly is trying to change a system, because it's not equal yet.
Yeah, and for me to do the fundraising effort was much easier with having a male counterpart. I had a male CEO, I'm the chief strategy officer, and for us, we ended up getting 2 funding offers for $3.5 million and $4.5 million. So that's nothing to sneeze at, but unfortunately, it took having someone as a male counterpart to help you do the fundraising efforts as well, even though it ended up in my lap anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And we've actually met a lot of founders, not a lot, but a good amount of founders who, got their advisory boards together before they even wrote the line of code or their prototype, and now are successful because of those advisors. And exactly what you're talking about, they were able to go get the contracts or the meetings with the people that they needed to get started. So great. Thank you so much for that. All right. So we kind of understand the boards. We're energized to get them together. So now how do we do it? Allison, tell us a little bit what you're looking for. What are you doing when you're putting an advisory board together?
Yeah, so I'm assuming very early stage, right? We're talking about putting together the advisory board that's not in place yet. So the first thing that you want to do, the first thing that I've done is similar to what Adriana was talking about, identify where you have skill gaps or credibility gaps, right? And I like to keep my advisory board to about 5 to 7 people. Otherwise it starts really kind of getting unwieldy and you just, right, you got to like, not everyone gets a car, right, Marie? It's too many. So you really want to think about, okay, what do I own? What do I feel really good about? I don't need another, like I wouldn't hire for this because I got it, right? So where would you hire? And if you're right, I came from med device, so similar to Adriana, I needed clinical expertise. I needed some regulatory expertise, right? So I was really looking for some specific things. I'm so sorry, I think someone's cutting my lawn. Hold on. Okay. So now I'm kind of in SEC territory a little bit. So I was really keeping my eye out for somebody who has regulatory expertise and has been in the legal world. Fourth floor has been amazing for that. And I really sat down and before I even thought of people, thought of, okay, what are the 5 to 7 skill gaps that I have that I would hire for, but I can't right now, right? You're just starting your company. You don't have funds to hire everybody. Those are my advisors, right? They're going to become kind of my management team for all intents and purposes in the beginning stages. And that's a great way to go about thinking of who you want to identify to be advisors, rather than meeting everyone you can and saying, should you be an advisor? I don't know, right? You say, I have this, I need this skill set. So are you the one for that skill set? Because I'm not going to have 2, right? You want everyone to be complementary to each other and not overlapping.
No, that makes a lot of sense and a great way to extend your runway. Right. Marie, you brought up a really important point about finding people are mission aligned. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's important to really look at what your values are, what your mission is with your startup, and then finding people who believe in that mission or who want to see you succeed and who want to help you get to that next point that you're trying to get to. And because if someone is interested in, let's say, wearable tech, right, and you have, what I have is a social impact, there's going to be a misalignment there, and you're just going to be wondering what exactly is this person doing for me? This is not really where I need the help. And your advisor might become frustrated too. So really making sure that your values are aligned, but also that they care about what you're doing. What the problem that you're trying to solve is something they care about or they have experience in, because that's really where you're going to get their enthusiasm and their excitement to really contribute to your startup.
Makes so much sense. And we're all energized by things that we love. So if they're not feeling it, it's important that they do. Okay. So I love what you said, Nancy, a while ago to us. You have a BS filter. Tell us about that.
Just thinking about that. So unfortunately, especially with the startup world becoming so heated and so much money running around in some of the spaces, you get a lot of people who are going, hey, I have a lot of money, or I have all these contacts, and yeah, I can do great things for your company. But in reality, what they're looking for is a vanity project. And so you have to put on, as I call it, my BS filter, because you have to figure out what kind of value is this person delivering to us? What are they going to be to our organization? And hopefully they don't become a drain for your energy as an advisory board, because you're seeing them as a trusted person that uses your time that could be devoted to your company instead. And so sometimes you have to go, you know what, I'm putting on this filter. I'm sensing that this person is just kind of wanting to have this as something on their resume or something to put on their LinkedIn profile, rather than, being behind what I really need them to be, whether to be an advocate, whether a person to open up the door, maybe even a potential angel investor or Series A investor or anything like that. And so you have to put on that filter and go, you know what, I think this person's not worth it. I can have them as maybe a friend, as a personal friend, but I don't think they should be on my advisory board at all, because they're taking up too much of my time and effort and distracting me from my company's purpose and energy that I really need to devote to it.
That makes sense. Adrienne, I see you really shaking your head. Do you have experience with that? Do you have a special BS filter?
Yeah, I would say for the question of when you want to form your advisory board, I agree that, I mean, if you know the specific person early on, it's helpful. I gave one example, but I also would like to say, I mean, Marie said, right, like at the beginning, maybe you're like, anybody that wants to help me, right, we'll take you on board, right? We need help. We're so desperate for the help and support. But I think something that I've learned, because we've had some people that wanted to be on the advisory board, and like they said, they become an energy drain, you know, really ideas are easy, right? Have you thought about insurance reimbursement? I've heard it 1,000 times, right? You know, of course, like you think about all these things as a business, like we are the ones thinking about it all the time. However, actually help me get in front of the people that make those decisions, get me in front of the insurance provider, get me in front of the people that, you know, can actually help me make that happen. So I think you need to have a very honest conversation with the person that you're thinking about bringing on as an advisor. And it's like, what are your expectations? You know, and what are you going to tangibly do and achieve, right? Because I can have a meeting every month or every 2 months and brainstorm. That's not helpful, right? I need you to make 30 introductions, you know, over the span of X amount of time. I need you to lead my clinical trials. I need you to, you know, for instance, one of our phenomenal advisor is the founder of The Bump, right? She exited her company. She is so knowledgeable about the maternity space. And I was like, she actually has structured her advisory, like, you know, we meet on a very regular basis. She comes to meetings with us. You know, that's for me, like I've learned so much working with her as an advisor, because it's not only about brainstorming or sharing ideas. It's really like, it's like, these are not vanity projects. These are people that are actually doing work for your company that is going to move the needle. And that's going to, you know, be exactly what you discuss. So I think treating your advisors and your conversation as like, what are you going to do? It's almost, I mean, of course not, but, you know, I realized that it's like as if you were hiring someone, right? You have to have expectations. You have to have milestones. You have to have vesting, right? So I saw somebody asking, you know, on the mechanics of how do you create that advisory board? Yes, there's this template that somebody shared on the chat, the fast, like, it's fantastic. It already has included, like, you know, there has to be a cliff, right? Because the first 3 to 6 months will really tell you if this person's really going to add value, right? So do all of that. Treat them as if it's somebody that you're hiring. And let them show you, right, that they really truly want to add value.
Yes, absolutely. Makes sense.
Can I add something? It's like, just trust trust your instincts. Like, I think that's one thing that we as women and those who identify as, we know, like, okay, this conversation, there's something that's bugging me. There's something that I'm, you know, that doesn't sit right with me. Trust that, and know that, you know, if there's a feeling, it's usually right. And so really be mindful of when you're having these conversations, to be present, to be intentional with the conversation, so that you can stay tuned, be in tune with what's happening and what are they saying, and is this the right person for advisory board?
Makes a lot of sense. And I think we're really talking about maximizing the board. Allison, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to jump in with one more thing just on the BS filter and what Marie was saying. And I know we're going to get into compensation later in the conversation, but one thing, I've turned away advisors who say that they need more equity or more compensation than other advisors. Not everyone runs their advisory board this way. I want equal, right? Everyone has the same equity. Everyone has the same vesting if you're my advisor, unless you are contributing something to the company that is above and beyond just being a typical advisor, right? So I got a tech advisor who's actually coding. Okay, fine, you get more, right? But if someone's demanding more or telling you why they deserve more to be your advisor, how lucky you are that they want to be your advisor, I think that's a huge red flag.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think compensation is definitely one of the most interesting aspects of this whole thing. And I see a lot of people asking in chat, and it is one of the most generally the biggest stumbling block for founders when they think about like putting their boards together. But I think before we get there, Abby, do you want to just tell us how you're maximizing the value of your board?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just super focused always, bottom line, on communication. So I know a few times people have talked about what your expectations are, and it comes from the very beginning of identifying, what roles you want to fill or what you want an advisor to be doing for you, and then communicating that. And for me, that also goes down to the agreement as well, like how you're compensating them, which we'll probably talk more in detail about, but like, if they're getting a certain amount of equity, they have to be meeting your expectations, but they have to know what those expectations are. So maximize your use of your advisors by properly communicating, by keeping them updated on what you're working on. They're there for a reason. So making sure you're asking for what you need them to do as well, right? And I think that it's really important to also realize depending on what skill sets you're looking to fill, there might be some times where you're in a certain mode, like if you're fundraising and the advisor that has those connections or has specifically come on for that need, you might spend more time with or be asking more of for a certain amount of time. And then there may be a transition when, if you're in a building stage and you need those strategic introductions to partnerships as opposed to investors. So be aware of, and I communicate that to my advisors as well. Like when you first come on right now, I want to be building out my sustainability initiatives, for example. And so I'm looking for those partnerships. So have a new advisor coming in for that reason. For the first 3 months, we're going to be spending a lot of time working on that, and then it'll be less.
Interesting. And so does anybody have any structures in place as far as like meeting with the board? Like, do you meet with them, your advisors separately, or are you convening a board once a month or once a quarter? Would love to hear.
I do it separately, and we just have it in our calendar for whether it's biweekly, once a month, whatever is the best structure. And so for me, it's, having them and knowing every Friday we're going to meet, or every Monday, every other Monday we have this meeting. And what did we discuss last time? And have I, those milestones, have I met them? Have I achieved those goals? So it's really talking about what are the next steps and keeping, again, that accountability.
So interesting. So it's a board, however, you're meeting with them independently. Adriana, did you want to add? How are you doing it?
Yeah, and similar. I think there's very few, because everybody has such a different expertise. So only when it makes sense, and we'll kind of subdivide into a group like this strategic marketing. Typically, we also do have somebody in design and supply chain. So we'll make sure that, we have pre-established meetings, for instance, for strategy that are agreed upon ahead of time. I think that helps, right, with everyone and setting expectations. But I think the great thing about advisory boards, and this is what we were saying at the beginning, right? They're there to help you, like, right? So they're like when you need, as you need. And, sometimes at the beginning, right, you bring them on board because it's a pressing need. And that might, fluctuate as priorities for the company change, as you continue to make progress. But hopefully, right, you'll have developed a really strong relationship with them that you should be able to call them in an emergency or text them, right? And they'll be there for you. But I agree, like set a recurring meeting and only make it. Sometimes you have too many advisors as well. You're gonna start to hear contradictory information. So just also make sure, right, that in the end they're there to advise you, but ultimately, right, in the case of the advisory board, as opposed to the board of directors, it's for you to filter out what's the most useful and make it work for you.
Yes, I totally appreciate that. I think it's part of demystifying the board or the advisory board, right? That it's not this stodgy thing that has to happen once a month or once a quarter. But to that end, Allison, what do you do when you have to exit an advisor if you're not happy?
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm I've been an advisor to multiple founders as well and have encountered this situation where founders don't realize that you can do that, right? And it makes sense. That's part of the vesting schedule, as well as your company grows, your needs are going to change, and what you need advisory services for might change. And so if that does happen and you have an advisor who is no longer very relevant to your priorities or your, the needs that you have at that stage of the company, and you don't see it shifting back to them in the future, then it can be a sensitive or difficult conversation. But if they have been a good advisor and you've really kept them involved, and to Abby's point, they've seen the evolution of the company and they've been by your side, they should know, right? Like a great advisor would say, I'm not sure you need my advisory services anymore. You really need someone who does this or has these connections. Why don't I help you find that person? If they don't do that and it's become very clear that this person just kind of shows up to meetings but isn't doing anything material anymore, then you can have that conversation. And if you're compensating with equity, it should come out of your option pool. And it's just like if you had an employee that was no longer the right fit for your company, right? You just say, I think the services are not matching with the company's needs at this time. Thank you so much. And and whatever has vested, and you just have that conversation. But you should always keep in mind, your responsibility is to your company, right? You have a fiduciary responsibility to have your company succeed, and you have responsibility to the people that you're serving with your solution. So you need to utilize the resources that are appropriate for you.
That makes sense. And I think founders, we just have to get used to having hard conversations all the time. But that brings us to, let's talk compensation. Nancy, I would love to hear from you about compensation, equity versus sweat equity. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, and I'm watching actually also the chat as well. So people are talking about advisory boards and consultants. And so those are two different things as well, because that plays into your compensation too as well. So usually with advisory boards, you are giving, it's dependent upon what you see as the value of the person on your advisory board. What kind of things are they contributing that are very crucial to your company being built? And it also will vary at that stage of your company. Like, for instance, if you're fundraising, it's going to have a bigger impact than when you're doing product development. And it also may be different if you're going to market or if you're building out your organization. So you have to take a look at the value of what the person is giving to you. And also another thing too is, are they personally investing in your company? So that eventually just kind of translates, as well as whether it is a percentage, options, et cetera, things like that. So you have to see if the person is also becoming an angel investor in your company. Another thing too is that you have to see how much work that they're putting into it. Are they kind of meeting your expectations? Sometimes they even exceed your expectations because it's a passion project for them and they truly feel vested in your company succeeding. So you have to figure that into your equation for equity in your organization. So every situation should be kind of like, okay, I have this pool of money, I have this pool of stock options or whatever in my company that I'm allocating to my either advisory board, because your board of directors is going to be different because usually they have a fiduciary responsibility. Either they've made an investment in your company or they've done something for your company that's going to have an impact. With your advisory board, it's going to not be like cash, because many of the companies, I think everyone in this group has been cash starved at one point in time. It's been really difficult. And so you really have to think about the money being put into your organization to pay payroll, to pay for all these things. And then another thing too, is that you also have to figure in if that person's on your advisory board, if they are a consultant and they're doing specific things as if it was a real job where it's taking 40 hours a week, how do you compensate them on like basically in some type of consulting contract versus sweat equity into the company? So there are variations, and this is always a topic of conversation. You got to have open communication, otherwise it's extremely difficult, and you're going to possibly not have the best situation if you don't communicate very well.
Makes sense. Abby, I've heard you talk about a matrix. You want to talk a little bit, tell us about that?
Yeah, and I mean, that really comes from the Founder Institute FAST Advisory Agreement, which is the link that I believe Breen put in the chat. And I think that even if you don't want to use how they have allocated or suggested allocating compensation amounts for equity, it helps you think about everything you should be considering. And so the way that the matrix works is that it has you identify what stage your startup is in, right? Are you idea stage? Are you post revenue? Are you in market? And then how much effort, as Nancy was just saying, as we've been saying all along, how much effort you're expecting that advisor to put in, how many hours a week, what the expectation is around that, and then deciding based on their expertise and your stage, their expertise, and your expectations for time commitment, how much to compensate. And usually, it's between, of course, 0.1% and 1%. But again, a smaller idea stage that's going to take probably a lot more effort from an advisor or from the advisory board, putting in more time, you're, in my opinion, asking a lot more. So maybe compensating on the higher end, 0.5, 0.6 of that, as opposed to a mature company where you have a very specific, it's 1 hour a month, it's this, it's that type of assessment. But I know that Allison has a different way of assessing this, so I'm going to throw it to her.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, so you can get neither way is the right way, right? It's what you feel is most appropriate and how you want to compensate the people who are helping you build your company. For me, my approach is, I said it before, I like my advisors to all have the same amount of equity. I just have a blanket advisory agreement. Everyone gets 0.25%. It's a very accepted equity compensation for advisors. Someone asked if you do a 4-year vest. Advisors, I have found they typically either have a 2-year vest or a 4-year vest. It kind of is, that's kind of like the lifespan of an advisor before your needs change, right? Before the company grows. I do a 4-year vest because that's just the agreement that I made. And I said, this is what it is. And I think I'm going to need you for 4 years, just based on how I'm building my company. So, that depends, but the only trap you fall into if you do more of a kind of customized equity agreement or use that kind of matrix is people finding out if they have different levels of equity. Sometimes they can get catty or then you can feel bad if you're asking someone to do as much as somebody else that you had given more equity to, right? And then you think, well, should I up their equity so that they're equal because they are contributing the same, but I didn't think they were at the beginning, which is why I just kind of like a blanket. And then, when I referenced that one of my advisors is actually materially contributing, I did do what Nancy said is there's a separate consulting agreement and there is compensation tied to that consulting agreement and those deliverables separate from the other existing advisory letter.
So that's how you're evening out the kind of the workload.
Yeah, his advisor, what I expect of him as an advisor is the same as what I expect of everybody as an advisor, which will ebb and flow in terms of hours and commitment based on the needs, right? As everybody has said, some advisors will come into play a lot during a certain period of time and then fade out and then come back. So it evens out over time. But the material contribution, that consulting aspect of it, the equity or the whatever you can compensate with is tied directly to deliverables from that project. So they're very different.
I just see in the chat real quick, do you still use a 1-year cliff on a 2-year agreement?
I do.
Okay.
But
what I've learned from working with a lot of lawyers, which the 4th floor is full of lawyers, is it depends. Everything is depends.
Yeah,
Abby,
someone who's commented and said they've seen a 2 to 3 month cliff, but as long as it's the same for everyone that you're bringing on. In terms of what you were saying of like being concerned or nervous that you didn't give equal equity and then there's an imbalance in some way, for me, I think the way that I maybe in my own mind have structured this is most people that are coming on at the same time when based on the stage of my startup actually would be everyone that came in really, really early, putting in more time, taking a bigger risk, is getting the same amount, right? And then when I bring people on later, I'm at a bigger stage now. So then this whole group of people 2 years later or whatever is getting the same amount, but it's less than these people, you know, sort of like the way that you might do convertible note or safe equity raises, right? People that take a bigger risk, that are investing earlier in your company, are, you know, and the risk in this point is sweat equity, perhaps is equity, right? But it's their time, it's not their money. They're not investors unless they're angel investors, angel advisors, but at any rate, so, you know, compensating them in the way that you are a little bit more the earlier that they come on, because it's a bigger risk, bigger reward. I don't know, just another way to think about it.
Yeah. There's one thing that I would add to this, because people are also going through these fundraising exercises as well. So that think of it the same way as when you do fundraising. So my personal view is fundraise as little as you can. I know that it's counterintuitive, but fundraise as little as you can. And the reason why is because with every round that you do, you're diluting the equity in your company. And your first round is going to be like the biggest chunk that you give away when you do a fundraising effort, right? So when you have an advisory board, you're giving away because they're taking the highest risk. Sometimes they're putting their reputations on the line. Sometimes they're putting money on the line. Sometimes they're putting time on the line. So you have to take that into consideration. Whereas people that are further on in your company's growth and development, you're already established in your market. You know what your product is. You know how you're going to be able to sell it. So there's less risk that's involved. So think of that as you also do your advisory board in the same way as you're doing your fundraising too. So what I usually recommend to the companies that I do work with, because I do consulting work as well, is do as few fundraisers as you can. Try to fundraise a big enough pot so that you don't have to worry about doing so many fundraisers that you dilute whatever equity that you have, and that you can have such like a longer runway and can properly fund whatever efforts that you need, whether it's product development, whether it's go to market, whether it's, you know, customer success or whatever. You just need to make sure that you got that properly compensated. And one thing I would add, because I'm seeing this happen more and more, don't be stupid after you get your first round successfully done and just either adding headcount or stupid things like, hey, you know what? We're going to give these great benefits to everybody. And we're going to do like Postmates every weekend. And this is going to be great. So be conscious and aware of what you're going to do with that capital, because you're beholden to those investors to make your company grow. That's the money that you're putting into the company. And that's also the risk that your advisors are doing as well.
Makes sense. We've heard a lot of stories about companies doing stupid things with investments. I also heard from a woman investor the other day that women don't ever ask for enough money. So that's her biggest advice to female founders, is ask for a lot of money.
I think it has to do with our confidence, because I'm seeing this happen a lot, even for female executives. We undervalue our worth in the area. And sometimes when we go and ask for money, whether it's a salary as a CEO, whether it is fundraising, I think we devalue ourselves, unfortunately, because we're like, are we worth this? And it's partially imposter syndrome and partially like we're kind of evaluating it like, oh, am I going to get enough money? You know what? Be bold, be confident, I hate to say it, but be a bitch and be confident and say, I'm capable of doing this. And this is something that I believe in. And I'm going to make it happen regardless of the people that are around me. And I'm going to find who my tribe are, basically, and make sure that this works.
I love it. That's great. So just as far as advisors, are we expecting them to help us fundraise? Marie, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's interesting. I haven't asked my advisors about fundraising. I do think it is a good conversation to have. And Nancy, thank you for everything you just said, because I do think as women, we don't ask for what we want enough. or we think that we have to have all these things in place before we ask. I think that's the biggest barrier. And that's been mine, I'll be honest and totally vulnerable here and say that, you know, one of the things is thinking, oh, we have to have all our ducks in a row and everything has to be perfect before we start asking our advisors to help us fundraise. And honestly, we, you know, because of our advisors, we've actually improved our pitch deck. So I think that's the first step for us. And then feeling comfortable enough to say, okay, this is where we want it to be, ready to pitch and ready to start speaking with our advisors about raising funds.
Love that. Yes, the perfection is our enemy. Adriana, are you asking your advisors to help you fundraise?
For the ones where it's their expertise, like if they've been there, done that. If it's not, I would say no, right? But how they can help you though, is like, if my my future investor calls you, are you going to answer the phone and tell them why you strongly believe, right? And in us as a team and what we're doing, you know, share your expertise and why, you know, again, what, like, give them the confidence that their investment is going to be, you know, it's that we're going to be a good conduit of their investment. So there's other ways that they can help. Not, again, others will help you, right? They can help you refine your pitch. They can help you review financials. They can help you. There's so many other ways, but I would say, for instance, like Nancy, I assume, you know, probably, you know, great person to have on an advisory board to help with that, strategizing that fundraise. I would say, but you brought your advisors for their different expertise. So I'd say just, you know, make sure that you're asking them something that they'll feel comfortable doing, that, right, that they'll be actually able to execute on properly as well. And I would say, so something I wanted to add just from my experience, with many of these people, you can develop a relationship before you formalize, right? Like, don't be afraid to tell them, I want to get to know you better. I want to get to, you know, see how we work well, you know, be a mentor to me, be a mentor to my team. And then the doors will absolutely be open for this advisory board, right? If we see that. So like I said, like, don't be afraid, don't be intimidated, don't be afraid to negotiate all these things, right? And I think also a great advisor will teach you a lot of these things as well.
Makes sense. So advisors need to pick up the phone when called. So we are very close to the end of this. I would love to just throw it to you guys, just a key takeaway from you that you want our audience to know. I know we didn't get to answer all the questions in the chat, but I hope that we answered them in the panel discussion. So Abby, can you start us off with a key takeaway?
Yeah, I think it's really identifying for yourself and then being able to communicate to the advisors what your needs are for that advisory role and what your expectations are. Because in addition, something that we didn't get to, but something that I'm very aware of is a lot of people might want to be advisors, but you are the expert, like, in your company itself, right? You might need knowledge over here, but you know the day-to-day and ins and outs. So I think it was, you know, just like Adriana or someone else said about, like, you've heard the same thing, you know that because you're running your company. So believe in yourself as well, and make sure that you're very, you know, aware of what your needs are.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Marie.
I would say be intentional with building your advisory board and take your time and really trust yourself to pick the right ones. That's
great advice. Adriana.
Yeah, think about the advisors as a way to supercharge your team. Yeah, I would say, I think I've learned a lot in this conversation as well. Like, be very clear about the expectations and, you know, don't network and find the right fit for you at the right stage. There's amazing people out there willing to help, but they might not be at the, you know, at the ability to help you, because as a startup, somebody that again comes and recommends you to, like, oh, like, go and spend on PR, right? Well, but you don't have the resources. So make sure you're also working with somebody that really understands the constraints of, you know, being mentoring and advising a startup founder. You want somebody that will be actionable, right? That will give you very concrete value, because you don't have time to waste.
Amazing. Yes. Nancy.
I would say sometimes your advisors come organically. Sometimes they just kind of pop out, and there are people that are vested in your company's success and they don't really look at compensation from the beginning and just kind of grow into that advisor role because they have an interest in seeing your company and maybe even you succeed in everything. And also don't have the expectation that your advisor is going to help you to fundraise. We had an advisory board, but they didn't help us fundraise at all. We did it all on our own, and we're very proud of that. So another thing too is that look at the value that your advisors and advisory board give to you, because those are going to be helping to form that sounding board that you really need, especially when you have those times of self-doubt. And especially, I think it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you have those moments of self-doubt of like, oh my goodness, am I doing the right thing? Especially when you're going through difficult times. So your advisory board should be that supportive group of people, not only with their expertise, but your belief and in the product, in your company, in you as a founder or co-founder of a company, and make sure that those are going to be valuable people. But the biggest thing is your advisory board should be your support system and everything. That's kind of the whole concept behind an advisory board, because all of us were amazing women. And, you know, it seems like a very strong, but sometimes we need that support system. And that's what our advisory board kind of serves as.
Love that. Absolutely. And Allison?
Nancy, I was so hoping that your last words would be a bitch and don't be stupid.
I can only say bitch enough times, otherwise I get in trouble. But yes, be a bitch and totally clean your crown there. So yeah.
So my big piece of advice is just, you know, for those on the call, if you haven't yet built out your full advisory board, do the exercise that I said at the beginning. Write down what your 5 to 7 key skill gaps are, because your initial advisory board, in order to be material, in order to be your support network and help you in all the ways that we've been talking about, they have to have operational expertise or the network, or, you know, it has to be skill based so that you're making progress and they know what to hold you accountable for. So do that exercise yourself to help guide who you're looking to add.
Thank you. You guys were amazing. Thank you, panelists. This was really, really valuable. I'm sorry we went over. Adriana, I know you have to go. Thank you for joining us. I just want to say real quick to all of you, please apply if you're not a member. We have lots of cool events coming up. I just want to flag, we have a platform tour coming up on November 5th, so you can sign up and see what we're all about. I'll give you a tour and then you can decide. Then we're also talking about crypto with some very cool people and asking, where are all the women, right? And then on December 1st, we have board boot camp coming up, which is kind of like, this sets the whole stage for what our board boot camp does. And there you can also meet potential advisors through the networking part. And we also have another panel discussion with experts that have served on boards. So we'll be, that's December 1st. And then please follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and everywhere, and share the word about us. And again, $1 if you join and post an opportunity in the board seat exchange. So thank you all, you guys, the panelists, you were amazing. And thank you all for coming.